Na 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 na. Hi, my name is Daniel Caleb Flick, the writer, director, producer, and editor of The Triumph of William Henry Harrison, a little indie gem that's been loved and admired by dozens of people the world over. If you've watched this masterpiece in its entirety, you may be wondering, how could one man accomplish so much? Surely such a genius could bestow upon me some wisdom of the filmmaking process. Your questions are only natural given the state of awe you must be experiencing. But despite all appearances to the contrary, I'm not that unique. Anyone could do what I've done. Even you. All you need to do is follow a few simple rules, and you too can carve out an obscure niche in motion picture history. After all, I did it, and I did it all with no experience. When starting off the project, I did not want to fundraise, at least not in the traditional sense of investors. I was this inexperienced kid out of college with no filmmaking experience except for a bunch of pretty amateur college videos.
And look, we just want to be accepted by society.
Who would give money to this guy? But at the same time, I needed money, so I wrote a letter to family and friends asking for loans and gifts, and this netted me a good chunk to start with. But over the course of the film's development, as more expenses popped up, this wasn't enough, so I went the traditional route. These guys, along with some loans and a part-time job, were how I funded the whole film. As for advice on paying these off, check with someone else, because I'm still pretty deep in the hole. All the deferred interest credit in the world won't matter if you don't spend it in one place where it definitely counts: equipment. If you want the end product to look moderately professional, you need to create it with quality tools. Obviously, the most important component is the camera itself. If you use an off-the-shelf camcorder, your results won't look much better than your parents' videos of you as a baby. I used the Panasonic DVX-100B. This was my baby, and became an extension of my arm. It has a reputation for being the no-budget indie camera, and rightly so. It's cheap and incredibly reliable, recording at near film quality 24 frames a second. I didn't use HD because I started the film before HD exploded, but nowadays you can find some pretty affordable HD cams as well. Never skimp on the audio. If your picture rocks but you got that shitty echo of an onboard camera mic, your work will scream amateur.
My name's D-Dog.
And I'm Artaman.
See you at the crossroads.
So you won't be lonely.
I used two mics. One, a wireless lavalier, which I used for almost all of the interviews and some of the solo scenes. The other was a Sennheiser, which I used as both a boom and a shotgun mic. Incredibly versatile and durable. That's German engineering for you. Probably my biggest weakness as a filmmaker is my lack of knowledge of lighting. I've learned a lot, but I still know practically nothing, which is why in most of the action scenes I decided to go with the natural light look. It's not ideal, but given my lighting knowledge and the mockumentary format of the film, I figured it was the best route. For the sit-down interviews, I just used two lights with umbrella diffusion. It wasn't professional, but it was good enough. When it comes to editing, you're going to want something solid, because when you have 80 tapes of footage to cut, your computer is going to be straining. Hell, you need a decent rig to cut together a 5-minute video. I've worked on Macs and PCs, and despite the mainstream preference for Macs in this field, I've just been more comfortable on PC hardware and software. You'll need a nearly top-of-the-line processor, lots of RAM, several terabytes of hard drive space, and solid video editing software. I prefer Premiere Pro. A computer like that can make the newest games look gorgeous, but more importantly can render video in a reasonable amount of time. Just as with finances, if there's something you don't have, borrow it. And surprisingly, you probably know someone with at least one of these components. I did. Or perhaps you could get in contact with someone who can collaborate on your project with you. Either way, if you're coming up short, it can't hurt to ask. You'll be surprised how far being nice and respectful and saying please can go. Once you have all your gizmos, it's time to bring your script to life. Having produced some amateur comedy videos in college, I graduated really wanting to put together a full-length film. So in January of 2006, I sat down with a friend of mine, Hua Kang, with the explicit purpose of coming up with an idea. It had to be producible on a near-zero budget and non-existing crew, so we quickly settled on mockumentary. In a mockumentary, you don't need a dolly or a Steadicam or crane. People are much more forgiving with the camera work, and it's meant to look real, which is a nice way of saying bad. But in the age of Cloverfield and the Blair Witch Project, where people paid $12 to watch 2 hours of camera shaking, what the hell did I have to lose? Q suggested historical conspiracy, and within a minute, I knew my subject would be William Henry Harrison. You know him as the shadow overlord who changed world history, but most Americans know him as the guy who died a month after becoming president because he didn't want to wear a raincoat. Since he had so little known backstory, Harrison would be perfect. I could easily blur the lines of fact and fiction, and most viewers probably wouldn't know the difference. Well, aside from the obvious stuff. So I went to the library, took out all 4 or 5 books that mentioned Harrison, and wrote a 60-page script of the true story of Harrison over the next 6 months. I advertised my auditions in Backstage magazine, the biggest casting call magazine for actors in New York and LA. I was upfront and said that all roles in the film had deferred pay, which means that the actors get paid if the film makes money. So that generally means the actors don't get paid. But I did tell them I would cover food and transportation, so that maybe got a few people on board. Well, that food and transportation call was a good idea, because in the course of a month, I must have gotten over 1,000 responses. It was overwhelming to say the least. But I slowly went through the pile, looking specifically for people with improvisation, stand-up, or comedy experience. Then I made calls and set up 2 rounds of auditions.
Now, I'm particularly excited about this documentary, which is proving, as I understand it, the supposed death of William Henry Harrison, which was false, it was fake.
We held them in the basement of my old church in Brooklyn, New York. Also the setting of Nathaniel's first scene in the movie. Why there? Because it was free. Plus churches tend to be quiet and holy. After the auditions, I called the actors down to about 10. Now, the script they had used for the audition was not the film that I eventually made. The script in the audition was a 100% Ken Burns-style History Channel mockumentary, with nothing but pictures, reenactments, and interviews. No story of a journalist or anything close to it. The characters in that script had names such as Southerner, Conspiracy Theorist, Buddhist. In effect, there were no characters, and this started to bug me. I had these actors, some pretty damn good ones, and in this script there was no real showcase for their talent. So I decided I would ditch that script and write a completely new one and create characters for all of these actors. One by one I met with each of them, and we figured out who they were going to be and how they were going to fit in the story. It was a completely collaborative process, and so over the next couple of months I wrote 60 scenes, 10 subplots, one for every single supporting character. I had no idea what I was doing. Nervous, nervous, nervous. I was so damn nervous every single shoot. Here I was, this untrained kid working with new equipment, working with improvisation for the first time, working with professional actors for the first time. I was shitting myself, I was so apprehensive. But the best way to get over this stuff, I guess, is to just go ahead and do it. So I did. I put on a brave face, pretended not to be scared, and directed. When I didn't know what I wanted or what to do, I just pretended like I did, or I stalled until I figured it out. I was generally unprepared for the shoots. I never storyboarded. I didn't know the value in it. I just figured out the cinematography once I was there, literally right before we shot. I tried to be as genial and gracious as possible. The actors were donating their time and skill, so I would give them the respect that they deserved. I would also let them be as creative as they wanted to be, letting them improvise or change scenes if they didn't think some dialogue worked. Very few of the scenes actually turned out how I wrote them. and it all led to a lot of fun and joking on set. Of course, not every single extra was a professional actor. I mean, this is a no-budget film. Most of them were just close friends and family who were willing to help me out or just wanted the fun of some screen time. These were my two most involved friends and essentially alternated as my entire crew for most of the shoots. Both Brian and Fernando were grips, gaffers, best boys, transportation, catering, you name it, they did it. And so between the three of us, with an occasional extra friend or two for help, we were the entire crew. I was determined to pay nothing for locations, and as I didn't need elaborate sets, just typical houses and apartments, I assumed I could wrangle favors and borrow some places. What I did first was ask all of the actors and friends and family if they would be willing to volunteer their places for scenes. Most of them, being the cool people that they were, said yes. Here's a few of the places where we shot. For some of these, especially the mansion, knowing that we could film there, I just wrote it into the script. That's what former low-budget director Robert Rodriguez recommends. Current low-budget director Daniel Flick recommends that you buy Robert Rodriguez's film El Mariachi for its educational featurette 5-minute film school. It was an indispensable resource throughout my film work. For most of the outdoor stuff, we just went out and shot. Obtaining permission or licenses is one of those outdated 20th century ideas. So we just stole locations. Sometimes we would get hassled, but it didn't happen often. When you've got a makeshift guerrilla crew of on average 3 to 4 people, including the talent, most authorities don't consider you enough of a threat to kick out. As for the 1% of people who may care how you portray their place of residence or business in an indie film, well, luckily that's what sympathy is for. Dole it on as thick as you can. It worked for me. That said, it's always important to scout a place out before you shoot there, because if you don't, you're asking for trouble.
Okay, gang, we've got a lot of paths of attack here. We've got all of our senses are engaged here. We've got sight, Johnny. Sound, Sam. Touch is, well, that was me, but didn't work out because of the lawsuits. Anyway,
the first version of the ending of the film that we shot, there ended up being 3, was a big shoot. It included everyone in the cast, and it was the first time that everyone was together on set. I wanted an office space for this because it was supposed to be a big meeting, and I wanted it to be in New York because most of the actors were from the city. So I found a place online, a warehouse, which was close to where Mandy, the lead actress, lived. I asked her to scout, not really telling her what to look for, and upon her approval, I booked the place. Big mistake. Here's what went wrong. The lighting was somewhere between garbage and non-existent. Luckily, as I mentioned before, I'm a master of lighting. Oh, wait. Anyway, to help the lighting situation, God decided to blow up 2 of our lights, and I had no replacement light bulbs. Awesome.
You didn't know. Oh, the small widow journalist had no idea that her boss, her most trusted advisor, was playing her.
I was in the scene as my character Jack, which led to random actors shooting without much guidance, leading to some unsavory shots. There was an open part in the script which was for an improvised fight, but I had no experience in directing improv, and no experience directing a fight, and the actors didn't have much fight training, and I was in the fight too, which meant someone else was shooting it, limiting what we could do camera-wise, and we were rushed. I think you know where this is going.
Harrison was my great-great-grandfather, and you will not ruin his legacy.
The mark of Harrison. Looks like poo.
Probably most importantly, the script sucked. Apparently, those are important in filmmaking. So yeah, lots of mistakes, which led to an unviewable result. This is actually the only scene we shot that I refuse to edit in any way. Seeing this footage now still makes me cringe. I especially feel sorry for Larry here, who was an amazing thug, but was cut because the scene was so terrible. One day, perhaps I can make a thug-centric spin-off to redeem him. One day. About 1 year later, after completing filming, I cut together what I had of the film. It was about an hour and 20 or 30 minutes, very rough, but it was something to show people, so I did. I sent it around to friends and some family, asking for as much honest, critical feedback as possible. This guy, writer-director friend Peter Paul Basler, told me I had no idea how to write a story, and he was absolutely right. He pointed out that the film was essentially a series of sketches loosely tied together, and there wasn't much drama or tension to give the film any momentum. So I looked at the script and started writing replacements for scenes that were subpar and added new scenes to create a little bit of that narrative momentum that I was missing. And pretty soon 11 new scenes were done, 4 or 5 months after we had finished shooting. I called the actors up again and asked them if they would get back on board and shoot these new scenes, and thankfully, they all said yes, and we went and finished shooting the film. Now, one of the first things I realized when I started editing the film is that I would have to cut a lot of scenes. At this point, I had shot 71. My friend Peter told me you should look at editing this way. If you cut a scene and the movie still works, then that scene isn't necessary and should be ditched. So I did this, and while it wasn't easy throwing away footage that the actors and I had devoted days to, it became a lot easier as I realized how necessary it was. You could take that to the bank. In the end, I was able to chop the film down to 1 hour and 20 minutes, down from about 4 hours of total edited material. Since I didn't have investors or anyone else with creative control, my final cut was the director's cut. That's right, you got director's cut value at no additional cost.
Daniel, this is Jake Sanders, the composer of the movie. Let's do this.
She's got my serpent hurting for certain, that's the truth.
This is Jake Sanders. He composed most of the music in the film. Jake had wanted to get into film scoring, so I asked him if he'd be interested in writing a few songs for the movie. He almost immediately said yes. As those few songs turned into 18, I wouldn't be surprised if he ever second-guessed his commitment. As for how the process worked, it wasn't quite like this. In fact, during the composition of the score of the film, we never met once in person. This is how it worked. I would email him cuts of the scenes that needed scoring without music. Then, a few days later, being the prolific master that he is, he would throw a bunch of options back at me. If something struck my fancy, I would tell him, give him a few notes, and he'd revise it. For about 3 or 4 months this went on, until all of his tracks were done. For the other music in the film, I enlisted family. One song was written by my cousin Eric Glick Raymond, and 2 more were written by another cousin, Ryan Garber. As for the Tippecanoe theme song in the first history section, it was sung by about 50 members of my extended family, including my grandfather, parents, aunts and uncles, and cousins. The piano was Ryan Garber again, and the crowd was conducted by his twin brother, Aaron Garber. And since this wasn't at a fancy studio, without any equipment, I used a tiny voice recorder owned by Ryan, which worked out perfectly, because it made the whole thing feel like it was recorded in the early 1900s. In the film, the character of Sam was a musician because the actor who played him, Chance, was a musician. From the very start, Chance and I both agreed that Sam's subplot would be writing a song about William Henry Harrison. And while Sam's subplot was mostly deleted from the film, the song that was written was too good to abandon. Chance wrote the basic melody and lyrics, I wrote piano accompaniment, and Matt Donnelly, who played Johnny Cyclone, introduced us to Bill Karcher, who hit up the lead guitar. 6 months later, we descended into a basement in central New Jersey where we recorded the tracks. And another year after that, I sent everything over to Jake, who dropped in the bass line, played organ, and did the final mix. Archive photos can be expensive as hell, but luckily any photos over 75 years old, with a few exceptions, all fall into the category of public domain, which means they're up for grabs. And the Library of Congress, which our government so kindly runs down in Washington, D.C., has put thousands of these images online for download, complete with copyright information. So I scoured their database for images that were copyrighted before 1933, 75 years before 2008, when I was editing the film, and downloaded them all. Most people have hard drives full of pirated music or porn, but I've got 100 gigs of old photos of rich white people.
The moral, young children, it's simple, don't try to ask any questions or else you will die. That and William Henry Harrison is evil. The end. Thank you.
For the original art in the film, I enlisted the help of a friend of mine, Eric Tron, the brother of my best friend from high school. As long as I've known him, Eric has been a great artist, and at the time of the film, he was in college, which meant that he could use a little bit of money. So I gave him a call. When he agreed to help out, I made him a list of the images I needed, and over several months, he put them all together. The final piece of the post-production puzzle was the narrator, and this is always the first question I get when people see the film. How the hell did you get Ed Asner, an Emmy and Golden Globe winning Hollywood legend who's been in hundreds of projects over the course of his career, in your film? Well, I wish the answer was more glamorous and exciting, but it all comes down to my father. My dad's been a political activist for his entire life, and Ed Asner is also very political. So their paths crossed numerous times, and I guess Ed had a respect for my father, because after only meeting me once, he agreed to narrate the film.
Mistakes were made, corners were cut. Half the time I had no idea what the hell I was doing. But if I had to do it again, would I do it in the same way? Hell no. No, I would have done so much differently. Auditioning, scripting, directing, storyboarding, I probably would have changed all of it. But if I could learn from my mistakes and make a better and more cohesive next film, it'll all have been worth it. Thank you for watching, and if you've learned something from this, please send me money. Kitty cat.